Okay, good morning. So welcome to Leadership Southeast Georgia, class of 2020, the second virtual session for our May program. I'm Suzanne Kirk. I am the facilitator of Leadership Southeast Georgia and also your co-facilitator for today's session. So I am joined by Amy Condon this morning, and I have had the pleasure of working with Amy in a variety of capacities over the past few years. And we are so happy and thankful to have Amy join us as truly our subject matter expert this morning. This is a professional development component that we weave into Leadership Southeast Georgia each year, which we have for the past couple of years now. And one of the things that we think distinguishes Leadership Southeast Georgia from other programs is we do have that professional development component. And so this is one of those topics that I was seeing more and more of a request for from my client base, because a lot of what I do is professional development in the workplace. And I occasionally am smart enough to know that I need to go and secure true subject matter experts in things outside of my realm of expertise. And so when I was approached about putting together a course on business writing, I reached out to Amy Condon. So let me tell you a little bit about Amy. So Amy is there she is, her beautiful face right there. She is an author. She is an editor. She is founder of the Refinery Writing Studio, where she teaches creative writing courses here in Savannah and provides editorial services. She also serves as the associate editor of Beacon, which is a quarterly solutions journalism style magazine that's produced by the Savannah Morning News. She has co-authored several books. She has an MFA from SCAD, and she also, in her spare time, spent 18 years as an urban planner, both in Texas and in Miami, Florida. So she brings a really interesting background to our session. She also is the author of a biography of the late Miami News editor, Bill Baggs. And that book will be published and available, I believe it's still on track for this fall. Amy, is that right?
I think so. They tell me it is, so let's keep hoping.
We're in a different world. We're in a different world right now.
It could change.
It absolutely could. So welcome, Amy. Thank you for being with us this morning, and welcome.
Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Welcome to our class of 2020, those joining us live and those that are joining us later by video. So we will be recording this morning's session for those that can't be here with us today. But we are so thrilled for those that you are here live, because we are going to do our best to incorporate some interactivity into this professional development session. You know, Amy and I both, as extroverts, enjoy the interaction with the human beings in a room when we are working on any kind of learning program, and we have had the opportunity to facilitate together in a couple of settings. And so we brainstormed, how can we make this a little bit more interactive? So we will be using a couple pieces of technology. In a moment, we'll begin with a poll to really just take the temperature of the group and get some of their reactions to the writing process. Another function that we'll be using is the chat function here in Zoom. So if it's not in your control panel, there's 3 ellipses, little 3 dots that you can click on. You click more, and you should see a button that says chat. So click on chat, and that'll pull up your chat box. I want to have advanced our slides. There we go. And in that chat function, we can use that to pose questions to the class. You can ask a question in there in the chat function. And so occasionally we may just check in with you and say, are you there? Are you with us? You know, give us a thumbs up, give us a yes, I'm here, that kind of thing. So let's test that out right now. Are you with us? Are you here? Did you find the chat function? Type us a message out there. You can send it publicly, which for this we hope you will, and you can send it privately later on. So look, we've got all sorts of folks chiming in. Welcome to Kristen and to Justin, and hello Amy, hello Cynthia, hello Erica. So thank you. So we will use that throughout the session today occasionally, so just to keep you on your toes and to also keep you engaged with the content, right? Yes, 7, it is okay if you don't use correct grammar in the chat function. We won't call you out, I promise. So what are we going to focus on today? So we've got 3 objectives to look at today. And, you know, it's interesting. This is one of those topics where we find that people's reaction to, oh, business writing, I'm great at that. It's not me, it's you type of phenomenon. And we, again, will take your temperature about how you feel about the writing process and what your perceptions are in a moment. But I ask you to approach this with open mind and know that in 1 hour, it is rather challenging to dive into a professional development topic, especially virtually. But I think there's something in here for everyone. A lot of it is really great reminder. A lot of it is some back to basics. A lot of it is, oops, I didn't know I was doing that. So I encourage you to come at this with an open mind for these 3 objectives. The first thing that we'll focus on is a framework for the writing process that gives you a little bit of structure to help you start the process, particularly on getting started. One of the things that Amy and I hear from participants a lot is that the most challenging component of the writing process is simply getting started, where to begin. And so hopefully this roadmap will help you with that process. The next thing we'll look at are the 9 C's. And Amy has this great list of 9 C's that can be applied to any writing task at hand and that will enhance any writing deliverable that you are working on. And then, of course, this is where we often struggle. And let me ask this question. Where are my grammar police? If you consider yourself one of those grammar police folks that a grammatical error in a writing product really turns you off. Anyone? Guilty, guilty. Okay, we've got a couple of folks that are self-proclaimed grammar police, grammar nerds. Definitely, it's a super turnoff. They're guilty. Yep, okay, so that's good. Self-awareness is the first step, right? So therefore, we don't want to be guilty of some of those. And we all likely have components of our writing that we struggle with. I know for me, passive and active writing is something that I need to work on and pay attention to in my writing. And some of the content we'll go through today is a really great reminder of those components. Okay, so that's where we are headed today. Let's take a little bit of time to understand your thoughts about the writing process. So we're going to launch a poll. And for those of you that are joining via video at a later date, I don't believe this will show up on the video component. So you may not be able to see the poll, but I will read the questions so you know some of the things we're talking about. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to launch our poll. It will populate some questions on your screen and you just click your responses really quick and we will go from there. Okay. So you should have a "How are we doing?" poll that has popped up for you. It's only got 6 questions. So take a moment to click through some of those questions. Do you consider yourself a good communicator? Yes, excellent, in fact. Yes, good. Neutral or unsure? No, not really. I need help. How often do you submit written work only to get it back marked up or substantially revised? All right, so all the time, frequently, occasionally, rarely, never? All right, I've got some responses coming. Keep it coming for me. Question number 3, do you ever receive written communication from colleagues and wonder, what is this saying? All the time, frequently, occasionally, rarely, never? Question 4, how much of your time is spent correcting the written work of others? Way too much, considerable amount, more than I'd like, not much, none. And the last 2 questions, really, we want to get you to be honest on these. What's your attitude towards the writing process for your work responsibilities? Love it, I'm comfortable, I have opportunities to improve, I'm nervous just thinking about it, or I hate every aspect of it. Be honest.
Loathe.
Loathe it with all fiber of my being is something we hear from people. And then what's the hardest part of the writing process for you? So some of those options are getting started, organizing my thoughts, editing, the grammar and mechanics, finding the right words, communicating technical info, structuring the info logically, or it's all hard. So I'll give you a few more minutes. We've got a few folks that have not yet voted. We're over 60% of the way there. So let's take about 6 more seconds and get you all to submit your votes on the poll. And then we will publish the results and see where this group netted out. All right, ready? And I'm ending the poll. Okay, now I'm going to share the results and you should see the responses of how are we doing. Okay, so it looks like I consider myself a good communicator. 79% of you said yes, good. A couple of you quite confident. I am excellent, in fact. We'll see about that. Just kidding. We had 1 neutral or unsure. All right, question number 2, how often do you submit written work only to get it back marked up or substantially revised? That can be really frustrating, particularly if you work for someone that's really gotten attention to detail, maybe a totally different writing style than your own. And so it looks like the biggest majority of questions or answers fall into occasionally. That happens to you. 57% say occasionally, 14% say frequently, and 29% say that rarely happens. All right, question number 3. Do you ever receive written communication from colleagues and wonder, what is this saying? So we're kind of across the board in our responses here. The biggest bulk of responses fell with occasionally, but a good chunk of people fell with all the time or frequently on the positive side of that. Interesting. And how much time is spent correcting the work of others in your role? Okay, so more than I'd like, considerable amounts, but not much at 43%, and the other half of folks were on the yes, too much. All right, what's your attitude towards the writing process? Okay, thank you for acknowledging, 43% of you acknowledging, I have opportunities to improve. I would argue we probably do. 21% say I'm comfortable, 29% say I love it, and one, God bless this honest soul, said I am getting nervous just thinking about it. And we always have a good mix of folks in the class that feel that way. All right, and then what is the hardest part of the writing process? Not uncommon. 36% of respondents say getting started. So that's great. That really speaks to our first objective. And then organizing my thoughts as another one. Our structure will help you with that. And finding the right words as number 3 in those. And then one honest soul said it's all hard. Okay, so that's really helpful just to take the pulse of the team and see how we're doing. I'm going to turn off our poll results here if I can find my mouse that has disappeared. There we go. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks for playing. Good to know where the group stands in our poll. So with that, we are going to address some of these common challenges that we hear from folks, that we see from people. We also asked the group for some samples of your writing. Thank you to those that were able to send in a few samples, and based on some of those and based on what Amy tends to see as an editor, Amy's going to walk us through some of the challenges commonly seen in our writing that I think many of you will be able to relate to. Amy,
all right, so here, let me close out this little chat. It's right in my view. Sorry about that. I don't know if you have seen this in emails, in memos, or and I've seen this recently even coming across in articles submitted for publication. There are so many exclamation points. And the thing is, I can't tell if you're excited or if you're angry or if you're a middle school girl, but at the use of exclamation points means that actually your work hasn't actually done the heavy lifting that it needs to do, because your nouns and your verbs should actually convey the emotion and the actions that you need. So you don't actually have to throw in so many exclamation points to share the urgency of something. Grammatical errors. And these are the most common but these are the ones that people will judge you on the most, which is, even though they're most common, people are a little judgy about these. And that's very specifically on the there, and there, because it's the differences between contractions, possessive, and usage. So there is the contraction of they are, which is just a contraction. There, EIR, is the possessive, that is theirs. There is directional. It's and its. This is the one that gets confusing, because here the its is with the apostrophe is the contraction, but that would normally also lead to thinking it's a possessive, but the possessive of its is without an apostrophe. Whose and whose, one means belonging to, the other is the contraction, and then and then. This is the one I'm seeing the most, actually, of any of them, is that people are substituting this temporal, something happened, then this happened, with the comparative, this versus that. So just sort of checking your usage, that helps you avoid some of these grammatical errors. And then the changes in tenses between past, present, and future. You may have multiple tenses in any one document, but you have to be clear why you're using those tenses. So if you're using past, you're giving background. Present means you need something now and it's urgent, and future is something needs to happen. So you sort of need to do your check there, because that puts people, when people read that, you're cueing them in as to either something has happened, it will happen, or it needs to happen. So when you're paying attention to just, and this goes into the editing, your first draft may have all of these errors in it, but when you get into the editing, this is where you need to sort of check those and make sure that you're grounding your reader in your ability to know where they are in time and place, and deal with the credibility. Because I asked a question out there on the chat, I'm like, so when you come across grammatical errors, does that destroy the credibility of something? And someone immediately said yes, because you don't want people to question, are you the right messenger? Because you're the one sending that message. One of the things I found too is I asked a few questions of some friends that work at either Gulfstream or larger corporations. And I asked, like, how many emails are you getting a day? And they said too many. And I think we can all agree with that. But one of the things that came across is that they get so many, but they're not sure, do they need to stop and look at all of them right then? And you may be feeling that too. So if we did better at our subject lines, where we sort of give an indication, this is what I need from you. This is just point of information. This is just an FYI. I need something from you. I need information. I need you to schedule something on your calendar, or this needs immediate attention. One of my friends who works in corporate communications will get requests from reporters, but they also won't give her a deadline, or they are really casual in their approach. And she's got 1,000 competing interests going on and competing deadlines all at the same time. So then she's like, if they would just tell me they need it immediately, or that their deadline is tomorrow, and I can think about, I can get back to them at a certain time. Those kind of things help people and signal people and your colleagues, and it shows deep respect for your colleagues at the same time. The other one I'm going to group together is the schmooze, the buried lead, and useless information. And I'm going to use an example from Microsoft. There's a memo that Microsoft sent out, and this was featured in the book, and pardon my language here, is Writing Without BS, Boost Your Career by Saying What You Mean, by Josh Bernoff. So the schmooze is when you sort of lull people with lots of good information up in the beginning, but then you're going to hit them with a big old boom in the middle or at the end, which is called the buried lead, which is what you should have led with in the first place. And then package all of that in some really unnecessary, useless information that they don't need to know. So this Microsoft memo, it starts with, this went out to everybody, by the way, and it says, hello there. It doesn't talk about like hierarchy of employees or who really needed this information. And the first two paragraphs read, Microsoft's strategy is focused on productivity and our desire to help people do more. As the Microsoft Devices Group, our role is to light up this strategy for people. We are the team creating the hardware that showcases the finest of Microsoft's digital work and digital life experiences, and we will be the confluence of the best of Microsoft's applications, operating systems, and cloud experiences. I'm not sure what all of that's trying to say, but it's putting forward this like really like rousing kind of like, let's all get around this. But 11 paragraphs later, and I kid you not, 11 paragraphs later, the line is, we plan that this would result in an estimated reduction of 12,500 factory direct and professional employees over the next year. So basically, out of all these good things that are happening, a merger with Nokia, the development of new products, opening new plants, 12,500 people are going to lose their jobs. But then they follow it up with that these are really difficult decisions that they're making, not that it's difficult for those who are losing their jobs. Then it takes 3 paragraphs before we get back to today, and over the coming weeks, leaders across the organization will hold town halls, host information sharing sessions, and provide more details on the intranet. So if you need to deliver important news, we learned this phrase when we were doing some classes at the Department of Defense, that bottom line up front, when you need someone to act on something, or you need to deliver important information, don't schmooze people, don't bury the lead, and don't package it in useless information. Put it up front, lead with it, and use really strong active language so that you minimize and you reduce people's anxieties, or in a way you can actually make the conversations stop, or you can make the conversations become full of angst and anger, and you don't want to do that. So don't overly schmooze, don't bury the lead, don't use useless information.
All right, can you relate to those things? So give us a yes, thumbs up, absolutely, or no, I don't see much of that. Let us know where you stand. Do you see these same common pitfalls in business writing, either things you struggle with yourself or in the work that you have to review from others?
Or do you also, when you get something like that, are you like, oh, my BS meter just went off, and then all of a sudden it doesn't matter what they say, you've just shut down?
Absolutely. All right. So good reminders. Yes, I had more than needed. Sure. Love the bluff. Bottom line up front. Definitely on the BS meter. Okay, good. So you can relate to these. So these are things that we all need to be conscious of, that we are not guilty of, and we all know them when we see them. And, you know, I saw that a lot of folks get real frustrated as a grammar police when they're trying to sift through the information as the reader and find what it is that they need from that. And that's really where our first objective comes in, is setting up a good framework for you as you approach any writing task to help you get started smoothly and get your message across as smoothly as possible. So when we look at this framework, you know, when we are tasked with a writing project, task, deliverable, everything from a proposal to a summary memo to a meeting agenda to an email, we tend to, I think, jump directly to writing the thing. Do the task that's on our list so that we can check it off, move to the next thing. That's probably a little bit about my Myers-Briggs type, as we've discussed in the past, but knowing we need to just get it done, check it off, and move on to the next thing. And real principle behind this framework is the need to truly start with investing so much time up front of analysis of our purpose and of our audience before we even begin to compose our message. And I would argue that we tend to skip that process and jump right to drafting the thing. So let's talk about what we mean through this business writing framework, starting with the analysis phase. So often when we are writing something, we are trying to persuade the reader to do something, to act in a certain way, to decide something, to agree to our point of view, to sign on business with us, right? And if we can succinctly state what our purpose is, it makes the rest of the process a whole lot easier as we start structuring our content. And then considering who is our audience. So before we get started with any writing task, can we answer these questions? You know, what's the result, you know, from this document, from this email, from this communication? And who is it going to? Who is the audience? Frequently, the person that's receiving our message perhaps isn't the final decision maker. They might be a gatekeeper that we need to get through in order to receive feedback from the actual decision maker. What level of info do we need? Just because we hold the technical expertise and the knowledge doesn't mean that our reader needs to or wants to hear every bit of that, but it's very difficult to edit ourselves when we've got all of this great information we feel compelled to share. And then what action do we want our audience to take? Why are they getting this? Why do they care? What are they supposed to do with this information? Those are the questions that the first things that we should approach in the writing process. But are you guilty of that? Sitting down to write something, whether it be an email, a memo, a summary, a proposal, and we just start writing without investing the methodical process of considering purpose and audience? Let me know in the chat. Do we tend to jump straight to writing? All the time. Okay, yes. Absolutely. So it's challenging, right? Because we've got so much. Okay, so a lot of folks chiming in. Yeah. Brevity is not my strong suit.
I hear you, Jess.
Yeah, I love it. So it's something that we just have to acknowledge, that we to invest the time up front. It's my favorite phrase of the feedback I was given early on in my career that applies to so many things, that sometimes we have to slow down to go fast. And if we are slowing down to put the thoughtful time and analysis into the upfront component of our writing, the end result will be more compelling and more structured and organized in the interest of the reader. So let's just talk about that a little bit more deeply. So there's 4 components as we analyze our audience, right? So who are they composed of? So who is this group? Are they the stakeholders? Are they the influencers? Are they the decision maker? What do we know about them? What's going to push their buttons, right? And then how much do they know? So it's really challenging if you are a technical expert in something to communicate your technical expertise at a level that meets the reader where they are. If they don't share that same level of technical knowledge, we have got to adjust our information that we are sharing with them so that it is understandable and they can take it, digest it, decide upon it, do what it is that we are compelling them to do with the information. And then considering their attitudes, right? So often we hear that if we've got something we're pretty fired up about, we want to write that email, just stop, don't send it, maybe print it out, maybe consider it, maybe just wait till tomorrow before we send it. But that's such an important component of analyzing our audience, is the timing of our message. And I think back to a program that I had with a major airline that may or may not be based in Atlanta. And we were doing a training program for 200 of their onboard leaders. And it was an affinity credit card program where, if you've ever been on an airplane, which seems like a million years ago now, where you as the passenger, a captive audience, was sold the credit card while you are on board the aircraft, the affinity card for that airline. You're welcome. So this was a program that I worked on with a major credit card company, Affinity Card, and we were there to train 200 onboard leaders about how to sell the benefits of this credit card in flight. And there was a little something in it for them. They would get a bonus if they sold so many credit cards on the flight, right? Like they didn't have enough to do. And usually when I travel for business, I'm pretty good about turning on the news in the morning and seeing what's happening in the world and keeping up with the world around me. And I don't know what happened that morning. I didn't. And you know, when you walk into a room and you just sense the energy, you feel the energy in a room, and there was a very negative, tense energy in this room. And I thought, oh, there's something going on here. The airline had announced that morning that they were laying off 3,000 flight attendants across the system. So how amenable do you think this population would be to get this real rah, 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 isn't this great? We're giving you more work to do, but you can earn a little percentage in your back pocket. How amenable would they have been to hearing that message? Not at all, right? It was not the right time to deliver that message. So we needed to pull back. What we ended up doing is brainstorming sessions in small focus groups about cost-saving mechanisms across the system, the kind of things you hear about, like if we take one lettuce leaf off the tray of food back when they used to feed people, we'd save X number of thousands of dollars. So attitudes is a real important component as we're writing our message. If we know there's going to be a negative reaction, if we know there are hot buttons that we are pushing with our message, let's go ahead and address those up front. Let's go ahead and prepare for those in our writing. You know, you might be worried that, let me address that before the reader has to ask. And then the fourth component in that are the benefits, right? So the what's in it for me, the with them for the reader. And this is one where, as a writer, we tend to write based on the benefits as we see them, because we likely have the technical subject matter expertise about the topic, but it's not necessarily what the reader needs to hear or wants to hear. And I think a great example of this is, let's say we're shopping for a car. Let's say we're shopping for a family vehicle because, you know, I got 3 kids. So let's say I'm going to go shop for a family vehicle and they tell me, I'm going to ask you to put some in the chat here so you get your typing fingers ready. If they tell me this car has side impact airbags, is that a feature or a benefit? Tell me in the chat. Side impact airbags, feature or benefit? Okay. Okay, so I've got some folks saying feature, some folks saying both. Okay, what is the benefit of side impact airbags? Oh, my family is safe in the event of a collision. Okay, got it. So everyone's seeing that you were getting protection in a crash, right? If they tell me that there is an onboard DVD entertainment system, feature or benefit? Let me see you in the chat. Okay, got feature. I think you're wise to me. You're
We got
wise.
you figured
Yeah,
out.
exactly. You got me figured out on this, right? So feature, absolutely. The feature is that there's an onboard DVD entertainment system. The benefit is it's nice and quiet as we're riding down I-16 on the way to Atlanta, and I don't have to listen to the latest Disney movie one more time on the way to Atlanta, right? But if that salesperson starts telling me about all those magical mechanical things that happen under the hood that I don't care about, that I don't understand, and I don't speak that language, it's lost on me. And so often we shoot features at our readers without painting the picture and drawing the connection to connect the dots about what are the benefits to you as the reader. So it would never work if they tried to sell me on the features that exist under the hood of that vehicle, because frankly, I don't care. I just want to get in, I push the button, it goes when I want it to go, it stops when I want it to stop. It's really all I need in a vehicle, plus all those benefits we talked about. Okay, so you get the point, right? So analyzing our audience from those 4 perspectives. So the message here, as we get started, we have to confirm that we've analyzed the purpose. What do we want the outcome to be? The audience, who are they? What level of information do they need? Do they speak the technical language? And what's the action I want them to do? What is the result? So next, we get to a point where we can start considering, okay, how am I going to deliver this message? Is this an email? You know, in Amy's example, that Microsoft memo should not have been a memo, right? But just from an HR perspective, how do we make sure that we're delivering our messages in the right channels? And what is the information that's critical to bubble up to that process? So now we're ready to get started, right? So we've, at this point, likely done a lot of stuff because we've analyzed the purpose, we've analyzed the audience from those 4 different perspectives, and we haven't even really sat down to start writing the thing yet. Now we can start composing what that message looks like. So as we begin composing, this is a place where I think, again, we invest the time in the 3-layer process before we just sit down and start typing, right? So going and pulling together based on what we know about our audience, based on what we're trying to accomplish with our purpose, what are the facts that I need to most abundantly convey and make clear to my readers? So do I need to go and gather facts? Do I need to gather that data? Who's the subject matter expert that I need to tap into to pull this information to make it compelling? You know, what do they truly need to know? Because without analyzing our purpose and audience, we've just got this salad of information that we're tossing together and hoping that we can figure out how to serve it up to our reader. But then they're having to pick through and find what it is they need to act upon or to make their decision. Once we've gathered our facts, now we start looking at what's the right structure to put it together. You know, we learned this in school, you know, the intro, the 3 points, and the conclusion, right? That still kind of applies, but it really depends on what we're trying to accomplish. If we are persuading someone to our point of view, we may build our case first and then come in with our recommendation. We could do that the complete opposite. We might lead with, here's what I think we should do. Let's talk about why. Right? So looking on our audience analysis of what we're trying to accomplish, what they know, what their hot buttons are, where they might be resistant, how much convincing we need to do will really help structure the outline of the facts and data that we have gathered. Now we're ready to start writing the thing, right? So I think one of the huge takeaways from this in this roadmap is we've got to invest this time up front in order to make the writing process itself go a little bit more smoothly and result in a better outcome. As we get started with the actual writing, considering our words and how we pull together the right words to craft that message become obviously the most important part of the task. And here's where we introduce the 9 C's. And Amy's going to walk us through what these 9 C's are to help us in our writing.
All right. Something I want to touch on that Suzanne said was this need to slow down to speed up is when you look at how much time organizations are spending on revising memos, revising documents that need to go out, and all of that becomes sort of a machine, and it builds frustration. But if we take the time on the front end, one of the things I teach in my creative writing courses is 80% of all your writing happens before you ever actually sit down to either put pen to paper or your fingers on the keyboard. And that's a hard thing to kind of get through because, you know, especially in creative writing, we're taught to just kind of sit down and just let the muse flow. But most writing actually happens in your head before you ever do that. And so these 9 C's actually help make business writing as well as creative writing much more powerful. And specifically when it comes to this idea of clarity and concision, if you know your purpose, you can start, if you know your purpose or you know your intention, and if your intention is either to make people respond to something, pay attention to something, or take action, then you realize that all writing in some form or fashion is persuasive. And when you're really clear on your purpose and your intent, then how to structure your whatever you're creating, whether it's an email, whether it's a memo, whether it's a letter, whether it's a piece of legislation, you need to get it out there. You can formulate it better. And the best thing I can tell you too is to use plain language. Now that sounds really strange to say use plain language, because in some points, as we've gone through English class, you kind of get rewarded for the $10 words or all of the descriptors. But one of the things that is so profound, and that took me a long time to learn myself, was that elegance is precision, and that when you can use the most precise language, you get to the point better, but you also are able to convey a message much more clearly. Now, it seems crazy, but we actually had to have an act of Congress called the Plain Writing Act of 2010 passed, because what was happening in legislation, what was happening in documents coming out of government organizations, people weren't actually able to understand them because they were just freighted with jargon and legalese. And that tends to be what happens when people are technical experts in something, or subject matter experts in something. They forget how to communicate that to other people. And so plain language is simply, can someone sit down and read what you gave them and understand it, find what they need, understand in one sitting, and use that to either take action or whatever you intended for them to do. It needs to be logical. It needs to be conversational, active, paced. You can use short and long sentences for different ways. Short sentences get people to the point quickly. If you need to, sort of make people take a breath, you use longer sentences, but use common everyday words that are precise and easy to read design features. And we're going to talk about those things in a little bit for high skim value. But here's one thing. Here's one of my favorite things is I often see these things I called word salads, where it's just a bunch of words all piled in, and you're kind of going, what does this mean? So I want you to take a second and just read that sentence, that paragraph, and tell me, put in chat, do you think it's clear what this even means? And if you got this, would you have to read it 2 or 3 times before you kind of go, yes. Yeah, and this is actually something that came out of a standard operating procedure that was presented as an example to us in another class. One, there's some misuse of punctuation, like the misuse of the semicolon. There's only 2 reasons to use a semicolon. It is actually to offset a series that, if you have a series of cities and states and you need to clarify between what city goes with what state, you're going to offset the states with your semicolon. Or it's 2 completely independent clauses joined together without a conjunction. Most people resort to the conjunction, as they should, because it's easier to follow. So this is a word salad. It loses its meaning because we don't know what we're supposed to do with it. So we took a stab at rewriting it. And so when you take a look at how we rewrote it, let us know if it's clear to you and you know what you need to do. I'll give you a second to read through that. All right, so one, we removed about 20 words. We also made it much clearer. And so that concept of clarity and concision helps people get exactly where they need to be when they need to be it. The other concepts are completeness and conversational. There's a balance between, you don't want to be so concise that you don't give people all the information that they need, but you want to be able to relate it in a way that people feel like they're in conversation with you, that you've drawn them into your universe, into your orbit. So if you freight things down heavily with an alphabet soup of acronyms, which we can tend to do when we get into our little universes. But the bigger thing is, instead of having to use don't use 5 words when you can really use one really good word. And that really comes in your nouns and in your verbs, using like really concrete and telling nouns, as well as really active verbs. So let's just do a little exercise together. And when I say concrete and telling, I hope these examples will help understand it. If I say the word house, what does that conjure in your mind? That really is just a structure, a house, a little stick figure house. But if I say home, it narrows in on an emotion, that this is something a little bit warmer. This is something a little, people live there. But if I say cottage, I'm saying something about the style, as well as who chooses to go there. If I say bungalow, when I say bungalow, I'm talking about a particular style, but also a typical time period and a certain level of craftsmanship that people get drawn to. And then if I said McMansion or mansion, that would actually conjure up something about the people who choose to buy this. They're wealthy. They want to show their wealth. So each of these is actually freighted with an emotion. It's freighted with an assumption, and it's freighted with judgment. So the more precise you can be, the more able you are to get people to zero in on the emotion or the action you want them to take. Here's another example. If I just said dog, you just sort of have a nebulous thing of a dog. It's not really any particular dog. But if I said puppy, don't you get a little bit warmer? There's a reason why puppies and kittens are the #1 thing shared on the internet. They make us feel good. They're so cute and fudgy and like smushy. And then if I said mutt, you would have a completely different connotation about what this wonderful, loyal, kind of goofy dog that's just kind of a mishmash of all kinds of things, but you just love them. And if I said Labrador, you're going to think, oh my gosh, faithful work dog, good hunter, great outdoorsy dog. But if I said pit bull, all of a sudden you're going to go into camps and think about what you think of this type of dog. Some people will say deeply misunderstood. Other people will think violent. Other people will think, no, that's the owner. It's how they're treated. Or you may think rapper from Miami. These are all legitimate thought processes. So we have to realize that words have emotion, words have precision to them, and they tell us something about not just the thing that we're trying to focus on, but also what kind of action we want someone to take. And then when it comes to your verbs, how many of you like sort of sit in that passive area? That's kind of where we were all taught to write in the English class. And what I find often is that when I'm teaching creative writing classes, I'm often undoing, sadly, what people kind of got forced into them during the writing process. And so people will sit there in that am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been, do, did, does kind of place. Really the only time to choose passive verbs is when you're trying to show equivalencies. Something is this, or we are that, or when you're trying to show something has been acted upon, not something that has taken action. When you use these verbs that are really strong, heavy lifters, they're active, like launched, tracked, spiraled, spoke, informed. You move the reader much more quickly through the way that you're writing and to what you need them to do. You're conveying emotion, you're conveying urgency when necessary, and you're also presenting a call to action. This strengthens your writing, and it gets it out of what I call academitis, which is sort of this very cerebral way of looking at something. But if you're trying to get a piece of legislation passed, even at the city level, you want to say, I respectfully submit this resolution to do this. And when you put it in action states, then the reader actually moves with you. And if you see also how we did those bullets, active, move, convey, call, those are led with these really active verbs. So there you can push the reader quickly through your document. And and when you think too of your language can also bridge cultures. It can also bridge the divisions that come from different professions. So what you want to do is sort of look at how do you relate to your audience. And sometimes we can get all hung up in the jargon.
Absolutely. So here's a little video that I think we can all relate to the use of some of our jargon. And for those of us that have worked in any sort of consulting capacity, I think you'll particularly be able to relate to this. So see how much of these you are, or many of these you are guilty of.
All right. Let's play hardball. So how are we going to position ourselves?
Let's hit the ground running.
Let's hammer this out. Let's get our ducks in a row. All right. Here's the 30,000 foot view. Let's fill that down.
I'll beef it up. You put a deck together?
Look, I'll do most of the heavy lifting.
Okay, I'll put my feelers out. Can you send me the dial-in? What's the dial-in?
Hey, Lauren, what's the dial in? I just pinged her. Somebody pinged
Hey,
Carl.
Suzanne, can you turn it up
Loop me in
some
on
a
that,
little?
Can you guys loop me in on that? So what space are you guys in?
Is this B2B?
We're B2C.
Is it C2C?
We're B2C to B.
We're B2C to B, but back to C, sort of. Sometimes A.
We're a brick and mortar.
We're soup to nuts.
Okay, let's ideate.
So what's their value proposition?
What platform are you using?
Who did their UI?
They're UX.
CSS.
IP.
ICUP.
She's C-level.
She's an acquihire.
A serial entrepreneur.
A disruptor.
A total disruptor.
That dude is a coding ninja. This new app is cutting edge,
Leading edge.
Seamless.
End to end.
Game changing.
disruptive.
World class.
Freemium.
It's pretty much the Uber of food trucks.
It's the Uber of dry cleaning.
It's like the Uber of tax auditing.
It's like the Uber of taxis.
What are the deliverables?
Are those baked in?
Are those included in our best practices?
Is that actionable?
I'm gonna have to marinate on that.
I'm not willing to die on that hill.
I'm worried about the unknown unknowns.
I'm worried about the known knowns. What's our launch date?
Do we have a drop dead date?
It's going to be 11th hour.
It is O dark 30.
Look, we need more wiggle room.
All right. We'll have to do it on the cheap.
Now, is that gross?
Is that net?
Is that gross or net?
Is that net net?
That's net net?
Can you unpack that?
What's your guesstimate?
That dovetails perfectly into my idea.
I'll put it on the back burner.
That's not mission critical.
I think that's sideways energy.
That's not even in our wheelhouse.
I don't have a wheelhouse. I mean, I have a house.
That's where the rubber meets the road.
How can we repurpose that?
Can that be monetized?
Can that be optimized?
Can that be insourced?
We're just trying to create some cross pollination.
That is the silver bullet approach.
Can we go under the radar? Can we go over the radar?
Maybe we can de-incentivize.
Can you disambiguate that for me?
I read it on TechCrunch.
Keep going.
CNET.
Mashable.
I don't have the bandwidth for that.
Can we talk offline?
We're gonna have to talk offline.
We are talking offline right now. This is talking offline.
Guys, we are batting 1,000.
There's definitely some synergy here.
You guys are like peanut butter and chocolate.
That is a win.
That's a win-win. We should do a viral video.
Oh, can you relate to those? Oh my gosh, I'm so guilty of so many of those. And I hope you all laughed out loud when he did this, because I think I have done that many times when we talk about how all of the topics throughout Leadership Southeast Georgia are so interconnected. So now I'm going to laugh every time I do that. So a great video of really just helping us bring top of mind. And that's probably another one of those cringy statements. Some of the jargon that we tend to use, right?
What happens is when we hear that jargon over and over, we end up not hearing anything anybody says. And all of a sudden you've lost your message.
Exactly, right? And then it's completely diluted because now they're mocking us. So here, shifting gears, here's an example of a very severe case of a compelling message. So I know some of you may not have been alive during this time frame, but I was, and it was a memorable day for me because it was one of the first times I was allowed to stay home from school, and I was sick. And it was January 28th, 1986, and the world was watching because the Challenger space shuttle was scheduled to launch that day. And so it was a great day to be staying home from school sick to watch this. But school children all over the world were watching the launch because Krista McAuliffe was a school teacher that was on board, and the first time a civilian was going to be in space. And what happened on that day, obviously, was a tragedy when 2 minutes after takeoff, the Challenger exploded and all lives on board were lost. What a lot of people don't know is that there's a backstory to this regarding a memo that 6 months earlier was written by one of the engineers on this project. Amy's going to walk us through some of that.
So there was a man named Roger Beaujolais who'd been doing some research at Morton Thiokol, which created the O-rings for the solid rocket launch boosters of the space shuttle. And he looked at weather and temperatures impact on those O-rings. And we knew that he knew by weather forecasting that we were looking at a particularly cold January in Florida. And what he realized is that O-rings fail when a temperature drops below a certain degrees. And so he put together this memo to go up the line to his, the vice president of engineering. Now look at the subject line. SRM, O-ring erosion, potential failure, criticality. I'm not sure even the business people and the politicians or the politically focused folks and the PR people would understand what that means, because that is not a language that they speak, but that's the language that they speak up in the upper echelons of Morton Thiokol. And then he goes into looking at building his case. And there's a lot of good information in here, and it tells us what's going to happen, but it's not plain. It's jargon filled, and even it's not in conversational language. The result would be a catastrophe of the highest order, loss of human life. These are in very technical terms. And it's also in this passive, the result would be. And in the very last paragraph, it is my honest and very real fear that if we do not take immediate action to dedicate a team to solve the problem with the field joint, having the #1 priority, instead of saying, let's make this the #1 priority, and instead of having that at the very top as the most important thing, my research reveals that if the temperature drops below this, the O-ring will fail and we will have an explosion that will result in the loss of the space shuttle and the astronauts aboard. Make it super simple, make it actionable, then build the case. This is one of those where you didn't need to bury the lead or soften someone's blow. You put it up top. And he spent the rest of his career talking about this and why it was so important that the way that we convey information changes, because he felt personally responsible because he knew something that didn't make it up the chain.
So obviously that's an incredibly compelling example about writing with a compelling focus, considerate of the reader. And here are a few other examples. If we think about how we compose our document consideration of the reader, we have to look at it acknowledging the fact, especially if it's lengthy, spoiler alert, people may not read every single word of our written product, right? So how do we make it highly skimmable and make that skim value very high for the reader so that it's very easy for them to find what they need? And one example is just the use of headings, right? So if you have got structure throughout your document that you can structure it such that there are headings, use those headings so that they make standalone sense, meaning the conclusion, the point that you're making is actually in the heading versus here's a heading, now you have to dig through this, what follows in order to find my point. So in this example, you know, the recommendation could just been that recommendation was the heading, but if we state what the recommendation is as part of the heading, that's the script, the skim value that the reader can just fly right through that, see those headings and extract what they need very easily. We also have to consider how our reader looks at the space of our writing, the physical space on the screen or on the piece of paper, depending on how they're digesting that information, and really making sure that it is digestible to our eye. You know, when we track from left to right, we've learned that if things are, it's many bodies of text and they're in paragraphs and paragraphs of block text, it's just these big giant rectangles where, you know, you looking at that will have to work very hard to extract from that and find in there what you need. If you can use bullets, if you can use some of your typography tools of bolding and ragged right margins, both of those things help the reader skim through there. They break up the space on the page so it's not just blocks of words, and then the brain is able to track a little bit more easily to extract the information in there. We can also create structural signposts within the document, right? Just a reference that grounds the reader with a signpost of here's where we are, you know, in conclusion, like, oh, okay, I'm paying attention because we're concluding, right? Or a back and forth reference. Given this point that I've just made, now I'm going to tell you this, right? So give a little here's where we are. And it's kind of like how we do with our review, preview, and big view with our Leadership Southeast Georgia programs that we've talked about. Another thing for making it highly skimmable is making sure that we've got visuals in there wherever appropriate and amenable to the reader. So tell me in the chat, how many people have ever assembled something from IKEA? Give me a yes if you've ever experienced that. Okay, a bunch of people, right? Hopefully it went well for you. I always end up with a few extra parts or things that like, oh, I don't know what this is for. But what do we notice about these instructions and any instructions that ever come with IKEA products? There's no words. So there's a lot of reasons why there's no words. For one, they would have to produce those documents in multiple languages, right, given their worldwide distribution. But it also eliminates some of the technical confusion. So for me, in that very first image up there with the happy smiling IKEA assembly man, there's two different screwdrivers. And to me, they're the Xy kind and the straight kind. So I'm sure they have technical names, but if they wrote on there what they are, and I'm even blanking what they are, I think one is a Phillips head, but I'm not sure. I wouldn't know what I'm supposed to go get. So making it really easy for the reader here, but just give me a picture of what I'm supposed to go gather. Okay, those are the two types of screwdrivers and the hammer that I need, right? So a great way to incorporate a chart, an image, a visual. If you're trying to Phillips and flathead, thank you. Thank you, Cecilia. I like Xy and flat, or Xy and straight. But if we can incorporate images to help our reader, rather than having to rely on our words to describe it, if it's appropriate for the document, include that image so that they don't have to imagine something different than what we were trying to paint the picture. And if you're like me, up in that right-hand corner, when you assemble anything from IKEA, there are more items required than what necessarily comes in the box. All right. Part of tracking on the page is also considering where our eye is drawn, right? So as we make things written in a fashion that are considerate to the reader, it's just about where the eye is drawn. And obviously you're going to read this first and then that one second, and that's how the brain takes in the information. So if you can structure something such that it's hitting that reader really evidently as to what you're trying to say, then all the better. So another of the 9 C's is confident.
So if you have a lot of data, you're going to want to present it in a way that people take this in. This was actually the cover of the second Beacon issue that we did. And what we realized is the data told a story, but we wanted the data presented creatively so it could tell a powerful story. And we had to be confident that that data really could do that. And so we built a house out of the data to talk about our problems with affordable housing and homelessness in Savannah. This actually became the top selling issue, and most people said that cover got me, and it made me pay attention. So to convey that we had a really profound problem with affordable housing and it was only going to get worse in Savannah, this was one way we could do it with confidence, but we could also present it creatively. Another thing to think about is when you can actually change the meaning of a sentence without proper punctuation. So correctness is, huge. You could possibly eat grandpa, or you could invite grandpa over to eat. You could actually save someone's life. Here's another one. Commas are important. No more tequila. No, more tequila. It completely changes it. And we've actually learned from the Supreme Court last year that it actually matters where you place your commas, because if it actually changes the meaning of a sentence, then you could possibly lose lots of money or lose your lawsuit. So make sure that you're correct. Those are also very creative ways of teaching you the proper comma use. This is a pizza, of course, and this is, the reason why we have this here is because this is actually an image that we used when years ago we wanted to present a creative way of getting people to vote for a bond referendum for Parks and Recreation. It was a notoriously no new tax environment. This was 1996, Miami, Florida, and our parks were in terrible shape, and we needed at least $200 million that we could leverage. But talking in terms of like $200 million, people were like, oh my God, that's a lot of money. But when you said, with the price of a single pizza per home, we can raise that $200 million and leverage it 10 times for access for everybody, for reducing juvenile crime. We tied it to those benefits, not just the feature, but the benefits. So think creatively how you can share information like that. All of these 9 C's lead into a way that you absolutely can make ideas stick. And that is, again, make it simple. Think proverb and not soundbite. Think of something powerful and active. Inject humor or twist to make a point, like the come eat grandpa or come eat grandpa. Employ those specific telling details, concreteness, credible, use your research sparingly but powerfully, and be emotional, that compelling, and tell a story when you can. Tell a story. Just by telling you the story about the challenger, that we were able to convey to you the importance of really strong memos. You hold someone's attention and you make them care by telling a story.
All right, so those are great considerations as you write. Those 9 C's, we've been through all of them, and we're about 4 minutes from wrap up. We've got one small section on the review and editing process just to check in on the timing. So thank you for Amy, those 9 C's. I always find incredible reminders, and she's got some great stories. So when you sign up for the longer workshop, you'll love some of Amy's stories. So where are we in the process, in the structure and the roadmap, right? We're here. So we've gone through the analysis process, really stopping and investing the time and analyzing our purpose. What's the desired outcome of our writing? Analyzing our audience. Who are they? What do they need to know? What level of information? What are their hot buttons? And how do we make a compelling message that will persuade them to act precisely in the way we wish? And then we start composing by pulling together our relevant facts based on our first analysis, organizing them into some type of outline, and then beginning our draft with the 9 C's and those ideas that we get sticky with it, and how we make them compelling ideas. So now we're ready to start review and editing. And if you're like me, I tend to edit and wordsmith and review as I write. And that is a very painful process. And so one of the ways that we have found helpful is to break up that review and editing process into bite-sized chunks. And so rather than go through a whole big review and editing process all at once, how can we edit for various things along the way and do it a number of swipes at it? So first, looking at review for organization, right? So are we structured? Is the information flowing properly? Is it coherent? Is it clear? Is our message abundantly clear as to what our reader is supposed to do with the information? How readable is it? Have we structured it for high skim value? Is it the right level of technical language for the reader and where they are with their knowledge level? And then we get into the mechanics component. Okay, so we talked through some of that. Let's get through review and editing phase with Amy for mechanics and grammar. Oh, this is me, never mind. Surprise. So here's just a few examples that we incorporated. So as we are editing for some of our mechanics, it's really pulling in some of the mechanical components and grammatical components that Amy's already been through, but a few examples just to make them a little bit more clear. So being concrete and specific. If we can write in a manner that's going to ask the questions that we anticipate our audience might have, let's go ahead and do so. So in this example, if we read something that says the contractor was late, it calls to mind questions. What contractor? Late to where? How late was he or she? Okay, how could we rewrite that so that it is more abundantly clear as to who, what, where, when? When we talk about tense, Amy talked about simplifying our tense and making sure that we are consistent as we refer to our tense throughout our writing. When you read a statement like this one, Acme will be invoicing monthly, well, it infers future. It infers that maybe it hasn't happened yet. So how would we rewrite that to be more accurate? Okay, if the information we're sharing is they invoice monthly, and maybe it's even more specific, monthly on the 15th, for example, we would get as specific and concrete as possible using our tense. And then a couple examples about active voice. So this is a perfect example. The report was printed is passive. So how can we turn that into more active, actionable phrasing? The project manager printed the report, speaking to who did the action. And same in this example. The meeting was led by Tom, passive voice. You can make that into Tom led the meeting by being very specific as to who. Another thing that weakens some of our language that we can look for in the editing phase are the use of helping words, the would, could, should, right? So if I read something that says you should wear a helmet in the construction site, that infers that it's optional to me, that I should, but I don't have to, right? How can we be more specific? Helmets are required in the construction site would be a way to rewrite that. And here's one that's interesting. I don't know how many of you learned once upon a time that we don't say me. We don't use the word me in our writing. And I'm going to ask Amy to chime in on this one. And so sometimes we see written language that says, send the memo to Bob and myself. Well, if we took Bob out of the equation, would we say send it to myself? No, we would not. It's okay to say me. Send the memo to me and Bob. And Amy, can you jump in quickly on that one? Because I know we always get questions about the me versus the I.
Right. I is subject, me is object. So when you see this and you see to me or between Bob and me, something like that, if you're an object of a preposition, then you use me. But if you're the subject and not acted upon, then you are the I. And myself is sort of one of those words that almost has no use when you use it properly.
But it sounds so fancy. And so I think sometimes
that it's necessary.
Exactly. And that's what trips people up. And I think that's that last point as well. Stay away from that jargon and the $10 words. Let's tee it up by the end of the day so we're all on the same page. I mean, it just sounds cheesy, right? So by the end of this meeting, let's just agree on our next steps or our priorities or what have you. So being really conscious of some of those. One that really bothers me is utilize. Why are we saying utilize when we can say use? So that's an example. And there's some great comments happening in the chat here too. So if you're not reading along in the chat, I know the Oxford comma is one that comes up a lot. So check out Amy's comments in the chat there. Couple more things on mechanics and grammar from Amy.
Yeah, so you want consistent tense, again, accurate contractions and possessives. Just the thing is, when you're doing review, don't try to do all your mechanics and your organization and all of those things at the same time. If you break them out into, I'm going to do a pass on this, I'm going to do a pass on this, I'm going to do a pass on this, it helps your brain capture it all, because you're using different parts of your brain actually when you're doing those different editing tasks. So when you're doing the polishing and the mechanics, do that last, because you've already dealt with the organizational structure. Also look at your sentence structure. Establish context, then follow with content. You want to ground your reader, and then you want to follow up with the information that they need, most importantly in their brain. So here's an original that came from a crime report. On a more serious note, a theft recently occurred by a vendor in a resident's home. The vendor was a painter who was briefly left unattended, at which point a warrant was filed. The suspect has been arrested pending prosecution. In fact, this has emotional language, and it's assuming that the suspect is already guilty and will be prosecuted. So we offered to them that they should rewrite it a different way, that the Savannah Public Police Department recently arrested a vendor suspected of taking the resident's silverware and heirlooms while left unattended in a home on Jones Street. So just be clear. And so establish your context, then follow with the content. Another thing is make sure your verbs are active and you have your modifiers clearly in the right place. So we have an original that was a really convoluted 2 or 3 sentences, and we're really not sure what's supposed to be demolished and what's supposed to be built. So we revised it, and instead of having a lot of passivity to it, that the project represents the second of a multi-phase residential community redevelopment of a 7-acre former steel factory site. This will involve the demolition so that we can create this. So this, then that. You've set your context, followed with your content. You have active verbs that connote we're going to do this, and you've put your modifiers in the right place. Parallelism is another one. This helps create easy markers for the readers and balances out. She likes baseball, movies, jogging, and to read. That's 3 different ways of saying something, but parallelism puts them in balance. And you do that by, if you're using all gerunds or if you're using all active. She enjoys watching, jogging, and reading. See, those are all gerunds of the active, or of the active verbs. So that's kind of a level of polishing that you can do later on.
Okay.
Oh.
All right, so we have been through our framework, right? So analyze purpose and audience, get into composing your message with your facts, your outline, and your draft. And then you go through these phases of editing, looking for different things on each phase of editing. What we've got for you that we will send to you as handouts is really a summary of some of the key things we want you to take away. And so you'll get a page that's got the summary of the writing framework and the 9 C's, as well as these high-level writing checklist components, right? So just those questions to ask yourself and to remind yourself how to step through each component of the framework, including, just where do I begin? Who's my audience? What do they need to make an informed decision? And how can I make this information manageable? And then, because we wanted to extract as much wonderful information and knowledge out of Amy's head, we summarize some of her just overall tips for you as well. And we will also send this to the class of 2020 for you to have as a reference point. Just really good takeaway summation tips that she provided to us. Some great info happening in the chat. The difference of who versus whom, constantly missed. Who is the subject? Whom is the object? Thank you for the questions. I know we could talk much longer on this topic, but I know we're a little bit over time, and I want to be respectful of our class and of Amy's times. We leave you with this great quote from Mark Twain: "The difference between the right word and the almost right word is really a large matter. It is the difference between the lightning and the lightning bug." And Amy is a master at selecting the right word. So here's where you can find us. You know where to find me. You can find me online at kirkhr.com, and Amy Condon, you can find her at therefinerywritingstudio.com. As you have more questions, I know an hour is a very ambitious time frame to cover all of these nuggets of info, but please reach out to myself, reach out to Amy. Oh, look, I said myself. Reach out to me or reach out to Amy, and we would gladly address some of your questions. But thank you so much for being with us, Amy. You are truly a subject matter expert.
Delighted. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we can go ahead and do our final wrap.